All right, cool. Let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be building a Next.js app, and it's going to be a full stack app because we're going to also build our own APIs with it. Let me show you a picture of what we're actually going to be building. So yeah, we're going to be building this full stack app. So it's a 4-page business website. It's got multiple pages, and it's also, if you look over on the right here, it's also responsive. But we'll get into all of that. Just a little bit more about me. My name's Zoe. I'm a software engineer and former professor, and I love teaching folks how to code. If you're interested in learning how to code, you can definitely reach out to me directly. I actually have a business that just focuses on educating folks on learning how to code. You can start learning with us for as low as $14.99 a month if you're interested. All right, so as I said, today we're going to build a multi-page website. We're going to learn how to build out our own APIs using Next.js. We're going to learn how to use Next's file system for creating pages and for routing. As you'll notice, this website has 4 different pages. So we have our home page, story page, features, and pricing. And then I'm also going to show you how to basically present data dynamically based on your route. And you'll see why this is important a bit later. It'll make for easier component building. So if you're interested in following along with me as I do this, building it as I do it, check out the links in the description below. There are links to the this test website, so everything's completely finished here. There are links to a starter template where you can actually just follow along with the code and actually build it using the components I built. Or you can start it totally by yourself with a blank Next.js template, totally up to you. Where you're going to be using Next.js, Material UI, and TypeScript if you do use the template. And if you do use the template, it's going to save you a lot of time. I basically pre-built all of these components using just regular old TypeScript, Material UI, and React, so it'll be a lot faster. But anyhow, without further ado, let me share my screen and we'll get started. Cool. Awesome. So yeah, this is the website we're going to be building. As you can see, it has that main page, a story page, a features page, and a pricing page. And yeah, and then it's also mobilely responsive as well. So you can see everything here with a drop-down menu, and we have all the other pages as well. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting tutorial. So stick around if you're interested in finding out how to build this for yourself. So first things first, what you want to do is actually hop over to GitHub again if you're going to be using this template, and you'll want to check out my PhotoSnap multi-page template. Again, it's totally free and open and available, and basically within the components folder in here, I've put all of the components that we're going to be using. And you'll see me use this on Visual Studio Code. There's also a folder that says data that has all of the JSON data that we're going to be using. So the JSON data being just like the names, the headings, the descriptions, and the photos that are associated with them, just to make the build out a lot easier. If you're to build this website from scratch, it could take you an hour, it could take you 5 hours, it could take you 7 hours, so having some of these pieces put in place will actually speed up your production time a lot. And then also building these techniques will help you do this long term as well. Cool. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to check on YouTube, hop into the comments section. I think you do have to subscribe to comments, so just go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like the video if you enjoy it, and yeah, let me know if you do have any questions. I'm going to leave some time at the end just dedicated to asking questions if folks do have sort of more generalized questions about coding. But if you do have questions about what I'm doing, you need me to stop, just let me know. All right, cool. So first things first, let's talk about how we can build our own APIs using Next.js and what that even looks like and what that means to us. So as you'll see right here, we have our just basic page right here. This is just the mobile responsive version. This is the template. So this is a regular old Next.js app that I've spun up, but just added the components and the data to it. So looking at this mobile version here, what I want to do first of all is talk about the APIs. How are we actually getting this data? Where is it coming from, and how does it work? So in any Next.js project that you're working on, if you look over on the left side here, you'll see that you have a bunch of folders. The only folders I've added are the 2 on top, the components and the data folder. So you can definitely use those as sort of a guide as to what is different about Next versus what is already pre-built in. But yeah, those are the only 2 that I've added. So hopping into these, components you'll see will just be sort of components grouped by whether or not they're shared or they belong to a specific page. The rest of these names could correspond to specific pages. But then data is actually going to be a whole bunch of JSON data that I've written out. Again, this JSON data is just based on what the initial, the design had to offer. And also, by the way, this design is from frontendmentor.io. It's a really great website. If you haven't heard of it before, great website. I get a lot of my design inspiration from there. They have a lot of starter projects where they give you the assets to sort of build the files, build the websites that you want to build. So you can definitely check them out if you're interested in, getting one of their plans or working with them or whatever. They have a lot of free options as well. So anyhow, hopping into data. So the data is everything, as I said, that I've grabbed from the designs from frontendmentor.io. And just looking at the homepage here, you can see what kind of data we have. So as I said, it's JSON data. And what that looks like here is it's an array. You see the square brackets, it's an array of these objects. So we have 3 objects here with similar data. So we have a source here, which points to the assets folder, the images folder within that, and then a specific JPEG file, so an image file. This corresponds to a file system that we have within our public folder. So the public folder here is, again, a folder that's included with Next.js, but you can put other things in it as you deem necessary. So I've created this assets folder that hosts all of our images and all of our graphics. So we'll be using the assets in these 2 folders as we go throughout the project. So that's the first item here on our object. The second one here is our heading, and these are just the headings that you see on the website itself. The third is description, just describing whatever the situation is, and the fourth is CTA, call to action. So this one says get an invite, this one says view the stories, etc. Awesome, cool. So we know where our home JSON data is, but again, how do we create this API, right? So looking forward down the folder structure here on Next, we have a folder called Pages. So if we open up Pages, you'll see that there are a bunch of different files here. So Next.js has this really awesome file structure that basically allows you to create your own routes using the files and the folders that are within this Pages folder. So our index.tsx, if we open that up, you'll notice that this is actually the homepage that we've been using in all of our projects. This div right here that says photo snap template, that's the one over on the right here. So everything that goes under this index.tsx file, everything that goes in here is actually the stuff that we're going to see on our page itself. So this is our home page. You'll notice that if you're not familiar, index.tsx or index.js, the index file is usually the root file of the folder that it belongs in. So it's the first one that gets called up. So this file will be the root or the home file for this project. So if I get rid of this, as I suggest that you do before you get started with the project, you'll notice that on the right here, it completely disappears and we have no more div. We have no more information there, which is fine because we're going to add in our own stuff here. Awesome. So we have our home page here. Cool. But then what else do we have in this pages folder here? Because as I mentioned, I said there's an API and there are different ways you can add different files and folders and routes, etc. Well, if you'll notice, we have a folder called API. And if you open that up, you'll see that we actually have a file nested within it called hello.ts. So let's open that up. So this hello.ts file that you see here is actually Next.js's way of giving us access to an API. So they've just nested it in a folder called API at an endpoint called hello.ts. But if we actually go to this endpoint in our app here, if I go to this /API/hello, it actually brings up name John Doe. And where that comes from is on line 12 here, where it says JSON name dot John Doe. So it's just taking that object that's within JSON and it's putting it up here and giving it to us as John Doe. So it's a really, really basic way of setting up an API, but it's very effective when we're doing sort of static data like we're going to do for this project here. Now we could just put the data into our individual pages here and sort of have it all over our app. That is one way to do it, but it would sort of separate the data and not make it as centralized, and then it would be a lot more difficult to work with and refactor going down the line. So it's much easier to have a proper API or a database or just a central location for all your data to live. That's why I'm using the JSON files here. So what we're going to do now is create our own API using the hello.ts template. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to copy everything in hello.ts, and within the API file on the right side here, or the folder, sorry, I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it home.ts. And what I'm going to do here is just correlate the names of the files, the pages we want to be talking about with the names of the files that we'll be creating for the API. So I'm going to save this here. This is just our home.ts. And if we go to home now, if we switch from hello to home, you'll see that we have John Doe again, which means that it's actually working. So, but I don't want John Doe. I want all of this information that is in home.json. So what I need to do is actually import that as a variable. So what I'm going to do here is import data. I'm just going to call it data from, and then I have to find it. So dot/dot/data/home.json. I'm going to save that. And then what I'm going to do down here on line 14, I'm just going to replace everything within these curly brackets, this object right here, with my variable data, because that represents all the data I have from home.json. Now you notice I'm getting an error already. And that's because basically the types don't match. It's saying that I have all these other properties that are on this object and they don't exist on my type data here, which is correct. So all I need to do is add in those types. So if you remember, we have a source type, or a source property, sorry. We have a heading property. We have a description. And we also have a CTA. And these are all just simple strings. Cool, we're gonna save that. And then we're still getting an error, and that's because this object, or these set of objects here are in an array, and this is not an array. So we just need to pass in the array here to the type, and so it's now telling the function here that it's telling it is that it is an array of the object type data. So now if we go back over to our API and we hit refresh, you'll see that we have all of the data that we had in our home.json file. So we know that it's hooked up and it's working. Awesome. So we've already started setting up our API. We're good to go. The next step that we want to do is we want to head over to back to our index.tsx file, and we want to actually start working with this data, right? We want to actually see that we can fetch it as we did in our last Next.js video. If you haven't seen that, definitely check it out. The playlist to all of these live tutorials is linked below. But we want to see that we can link that, and we'll do it again here. So I want to hop back into index.tsx, and I'm going to create a variable here. So I'm going to say const data, and I'm going to create a setter next to it, set data, and using state, I'm just going to start it off as an array with an empty object in it, but I'm going to have to change that shortly. I'm going to import state from React, and then using a use effect, or the hook use effect, I'm going to go ahead and fetch the data. And also, if you're interested in there's documentation on this on Next.js's website. If you just look up Next.js client-side routing, you'll be able to see sort of the why and how to do all of this on their website. But anyhow, using the use effect, I'm going to use the fetch API, and I'm just going to fetch for the exact route that we have. So it's /API/home. I'm going to chain a then to it, and when I get my response, I'm going to JSON. Turn my response into JSON. And then I'm going to chain one more then. And then I'm going to take the data. And then I want to set the data to be this data. And let me change it to info so you know a little bit here. So this is info. Oops. I'm going to set the data to be info. So basically the information that I'm getting from the API endpoint, I want to set it to the data variable. And just to make sure that we've done this correctly, we can actually console.log data and check it out in our console over here. And if we've done it correctly, we refresh the page, we'll see that we actually have our data here. So you'll see on the right here, we have our source that points to our assets folder, CTA, description, heading, etc. And everything's working perfectly. Awesome. Cool. So now that we know that we've set up our API locally, we've fetched our data from that API, we want to present it in some way according to the design style and everything that we know from our sort of sample website. So hopping over back to the sample website, it looks like there is this like text box on the left-hand side here, followed by this big image on the right-hand side. And depending on whether or not you're designing mobile first or just desktop, or, you know, I usually recommend starting mobile first. That way you can just sort of modify from there. But it depends on what you're comfortable with and what you're used to. So mobile first, the image comes first, and then the text follows. But again, all of this has been handled for you in the components that are linked down below in that repository in the starter template. And that's what we're using in our project here. So basically, I'm going to hop over to my components here, right? Because everything has been built already. I shouldn't have to go and build any real components, maybe use a few divs and things like that to link them together, but for the most part, everything should be set. So if I go into my home folder here, I notice that there's one called home gallery container, but I don't think that's right. That seems like something different. It's talking about an image here. So if I actually hop into the shared folder here, there are a whole bunch of different files here that one of them should be the right one. And looking at the names of all these, I think it's going to be the text and image one. I mean, I know it's going to be the text and image one because I created this, but if I were you, this is kind of how I'd approach trying to figure out which component to work with. And it's the same for any sort of style or design system that you might not have a lot of documentation on. You just want to sort of reason through with what components you want to work with and things like that. So if I open up style and image container, I can then go through the information and see if it matches sort of what I'm expecting it to be. Already from looking at the props, it looks like it takes a prop or an object named data that has props of source, heading, description, and CTA, which from our API we know matches exactly with what the data we're looking to present. And then it's called text and image container, which is what we want to present. And it has a whole bunch of different styles here, which I'm not really too concerned about. And then it returns all of this within a box with a display image and a text box, which again looks kind of like exactly what we want to do. So I'm going to take a bet and say that this is the one we're going to want to work with, and I'm going to go back into my index.tsx file and spin it up in our app. So remembering the data, there are 3 different images and sort of text combinations. So I'm guessing I'm going to want to, and because it's an array, I'm guessing I'm going to want to map over the data. So what I'm going to do in the bottom here, I'm going to create a box just to put everything within. And a box is basically just a div from Material UI. You're going to import it. And then within that box, I'm going to take data and I'm going to map over it. So data.map for each piece of info. I want to return, what was it, a text and image container. And then I want to pass data. I want to pass info as data. And again, I'm saying info here, but you could literally just say pass data as data, but because we have data up above, just to make it a little bit clearer, I'm passing data. And so you'll see already, we have everything showing up for us. So we've definitely hooked it up correctly, and things are working properly. Now you'll notice that we do have an error on line 27, and that is because we don't have a key. So when we're thinking about key, they should be a unique value. I know from setting it up that all the pictures are unique, so I could say info.source, because that's a source location for the image itself, and then it should work. I'm getting another error though, because remember I told you on line 8 I'm going to have to fix something. This is that something. So it says the type does not exist on the open empty object, and that's because we haven't actually specified what the object should be initialized at, so that when the page first renders, it's like, there's no information here. I don't know what I'm looking for. Why are you telling me to use the source property that doesn't exist on this object? So what we need to do when we're initializing our data is actually initialize it with some sort of placeholder variables. So what I'm going to do in this object on line 8 here is add in these placeholder variables. So source is going to be an empty string. They're all going to be empty strings, but heading, description, and CTA. It's going to be an empty string as well. And I'm just going to save that. And good, no more errors on this page, and we have our stuff displaying on the right here. And just, we can also check it we can actually check it full screen here. We can see that, awesome, it's displaying properly for us here. We also have this just like funky background that I added in. That's actually added, I believe, in the underscore app.tsx folder, just to kind of give it a different vibe, and to make the responsiveness a little bit easier to control. Cool. But you'll notice that we're actually missing something. We're missing this big nav bar right here. So that's something we actually want to go ahead and throw in there, because as I said, everything's totally built, so we just need to find it and put it in the right spot. So hopping back over to our pages here, we want to actually check out for in the components folder here. The nav's probably going to be something that's shared, because again, if you check out the original website here, you'll see that, everything is used, the nav is on every page. So when we're thinking about where we want to put it, we probably don't want to put it in the index.tsx file, because it's a file that is not going to be there when we go to our different pages, right? So we want to make sure, because it's essentially the slash, just the home page. It's not the pricing page or the features page or anything else. So we want to take our navigation, which we have here, and we want to put it on a part of the app that will basically touch everything. So I think I'm going to put it in app.tsx, but I think I'm actually going to put it above this div because I don't want it to be confined by this like linear gradient background. I want it to sort of be able to stretch beyond it if it needs be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import navigation from my components and save it right there. And awesome, that looks good on mobile. Let's see what it looks like on desktop. Looks good too. All right, cool. So I think I've put it in the right place here. And you'll see right now these don't go anywhere. You'll notice that I'm getting 404s when I click on the pages, but they do link, if you look at the URL here, they do link to pages that are supposed to be happening. All right, let me take a pause real quick and see if I have any questions. All right, cool. So question from Crystal here. Why do we call it info instead of data? Again, yeah, I was just calling it info to call it info because we do have this secondary data prop up here, this data variable, I should say, just to sort of like keep everybody focused and not to like overuse the data, but you could really use data and it would recognize it as data here, just to sort of keep folks focus on, you know, what is meant to be passed and clarify things a little bit, but good question. All right, cool. So let's keep going with this. So we've created this page here, but as I mentioned, right, when I go to stories, I'm getting an error. And that's because we don't actually have a stories file yet, right? As I mentioned in the pages file here, when you're looking in this file here, the underscore files don't exist. Those aren't real routes. But if I want to have more routes in my actual app itself, I need to add other files. So if I go new file, stories.tsx, and I just make a really quick component, save that. If we refresh this page, you'll see that we have a really weird, ugly looking stories, but we can fix that. But it does work, right? So basically the way to create new routes in Next.js is to actually just go into the pages folder and just create a new file, a new component, a new functional component. So yeah, it's a really, really simple and quick way that Next allows you to create routes super quickly. You can even create dynamic routes using the different syntax. That's not required for our site today, so I haven't built it in as a part of the tutorial, but definitely something we can talk about. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of possibilities with Next.js and the way they have pages being built. All right, cool. So hopping back, we're going to come back to stories in a little bit, but let's finish up with our index.tsx. So going back home, we have our main page right here. Right, everything's good to go, but we're missing a few components, right? So on our actual example site here, we have this like gallery page here, we have the features, different features here, and then we have the footer. So like 3 different components that we should add. So let's hop back over here. Looking at the components here, I think I remember something about the home gallery container being in here. And if you look inside here, you'll actually see that there's already a fetch taking place. So it's fetching at /API/gallery, and it's returning a set of images, which is cool. But if you look at our API, we don't actually have that set up yet. So let's go ahead and set that up and then include this gallery in our actual app itself. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call it gallery.ts. Oops. .ts. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy what I did in home and just modify it a little bit. If you go to our data, and gallery.json, you'll see that we do have data for gallery already. So we don't have to do too much work, too much heavy lifting. But what is interesting though, you'll notice that gallery has a whole bunch of different objects. You know, that's probably more than 10 objects. But in our page right here, we only have 4 objects, only 4 images. So looking back at this file here, looking back at this component, home gallery container, it seems interesting. But if you look at what's happening here, so we do the same thing. We create a variable called data. We fetch from the API, and we set data to be whatever we get from the API. So it should be like 12 images. But then within the component, we actually do a slice on the array of data. So what a slice is, it just takes literally like a slice of the total set of data. So in this case, we're taking from the first object all the way to the 4th. And we're just going to display that slice of the array. We don't want to explain everything in the array, just the first 4 objects. And that's how we get this home gallery container with only 4 objects versus with 12 objects. Cool. So hopping back into our gallery.ts, we know that we want to import data, but we want to import data from gallery.json. And then again, we're going to get that type error because we need to match up the types. So The gallery has source, date, heading, and author. So we just need to change those. So we have source, we already have heading. We can just change this to date and change this one to author. And that should fix our issue. Awesome. Cool. So I can close this out now. We're done with that. We're done with that. And then we don't actually need this for now. We can hop back into our index.tsx, and then below our data.map for our text and image container, we can just return the home gallery container. So no need to map anything this time. It's already done within that component. Cool. And then scrolling down, you'll see that we have our 4 components there. Awesome. And checking it on full screen. Awesome. Cool. So you can see that we have our 4 images there. Perfect. Working really well. The second from last thing is the features. So let's hop back over here and see where the features would be. Maybe it's in shared, the features container. Okay, cool. So I want to highlight something really awesome that's happening in this features container. So one thing, we're gonna have to build another API endpoint, which is fine. That's the kind of the point of this tutorial. But a second really awesome thing that's happening here. So as I mentioned before, there are ways to slice. You can slice the data. Just get between 0 and 4, 0 and 3, or whatever number of items you're looking to return. So when we look at this page in the example, we notice that we're only returning 3 objects, right? But hopping over to the data in features.json, you'll notice that there are more than 3 objects, right? So how is this possible? How is this working? How has this madness been set up? Well, hopping back over to our features container, you'll notice that there's this really interesting check that happens here. And it basically is checking to see if the root has features in it, if it starts with features, and then it's either returning all of the data or it's just returning a slice of the data. Because there is a page in our app called features. And on that page, we do want to display all 6 objects, all 6 features. But on our home page, we only want to give the users a taste. We only want to give the first 3. So if we really analyze what's going on here, let's kind of hit it from the top. So on line 4, we're importing use router, which is a hook, from next router, right? It's the router that is available to us because we're using Next.js. Then on line 14, we are triggering that hook and saving it to a variable called router. Then on line 15, we're creating a new variable called route. Again, you could kind of simplify some of these steps, but I'm breaking it down so it's really obvious. We create a new variable called route, and what that does is it takes this object router and it looks for the route prop on the router object. So what that route prop is going to be is the actual route, the URL of our app. So if the URL is /features or /pricing or /stories, it's going to grab the whole URL and search along that URL, and we'll basically return that whole URL. So we want to then take this route variable and we want to see if it starts with features, right? So on the features page, yeah, we do want it to have all of the features that are available to us. We want to see all the features that are in our JSON object. However, if it's not on the features page, right? So if the route starts with features, yeah, return all of the data. If the route, however, does not start with features, just give us a slice. Just give us the first 3 objects and return that instead. So we don't have a dedicated features component for the homepage. We actually are just doing a different check. And I put in these checks sort of intentionally differently just to give you a sense of how you are able to do these things differently with Next.js. So really, all we need to do now is head back to our index.ts and import our features container. Save that. And we're getting an error because we didn't hook up the API. So let's do that really quickly. Cool. So hopping into our API folder, create a new file just like we did before. And we're just going to call it features.ts. Oops, not tsx. TS. Cool. And then we are going to copy what was in gallery, paste that in there. And I'm going to change this to features.json. You'll notice that I actually have features.json and feature page data. This is the data for the actual page for features, but we're not there yet. So we're just going to take features.json and let me see what that object requires from me. So source, heading, and description. Okay, pretty simple. So heading back to features, I'm just going to say source, heading, and I'm just going back to description and get rid of author. And save that. Cool. No more errors. I think that should be it. Let's go ahead and refresh this. And awesome, we have our features there. It's working, and it's working on our page as well. Awesome, cool. So the last thing we want to add now, and actually, hold on, let me take any questions about that because that was a little bit complicated. Question. All right, cool. So I've got some great general questions and specific questions. So I'll answer both. Is there any benefit or disadvantage to using a Mac? Whatever you want to use to code on, totally up to you. Macs are, they're fine, but I also code on a PC a lot, so it just depends on what you're trying to code. If you're trying to code like Apple specific apps, then yeah, definitely a Mac. But other than that, totally up to you. But then specifically about the project we're working on, can you explain the passing of info nesting within the APIs? It's like use state. Okay, so like in terms of the way we passed, so the passing. Oh, I think I see what you're saying. So the passing of like info to set data. So again, this is we're just passing like whatever we're fetching from this API. We're just grabbing that and then we're just passing it forward to set it into data. So it's really just like this variable, this object that we have, and we're just passing it to set it to the data. Hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, please just clarify in the comments and I'll respond. All right, cool. So we're almost done with our homepage. So we're like moving pretty quickly. If you were just coding this by yourself and not like, taking pauses and breaks and explanations, you could probably do this in an hour. So definitely a really quick project to use. Again, if you do want to use the components that I have available, definitely check in the description below. There's a link to the GitHub repo with all of these components available for free if you want to use that. All right, so the last thing we need to have is our footer component. And the footer component is very similar to the navigation. We don't want it necessarily like limited by everything because it's on every single page, right? So we want to put our footer somewhere, and just checking where it is. It's in our shared folder right here. We want to put it somewhere where it's accessible. So I'm thinking I'm going to put it in the same folder where I put the navigation and do a sort of similar thing. Navigation on top because it has to be the top of the app, but I think the footer will go at the bottom. So just going through our objects here, we have navigation, our elements. We have navigation, we have our div, which is just a background style div. We have a container. So I put in this container here, which you've already seen. It's what keeps the app sort of within these, within the linear gradient. It's just to make responsive design a lot easier. And it's a material UI container. So we have our container, and then below that we have component. And this is basically Next.js's way of passing all of these files and all of these different routes to the actual app itself. So it's a bit of a different routing structure, but typically you don't really touch the app.tsx file. We're just using it here because we have to make some modifications. So I'm going to drop the footer outside of all of that on the same like sort of hierarchical level as the navigation. I'm going to save that. And then if I've done it right, awesome. It's right there. And I'll know for sure if I've done it right if I check on the page here and it doesn't bleed onto the sides. Oh no, it does bleed. All right, so maybe we want to actually move it to a different spot and check our backgrounds here. Cool. So if we check our footer.tsx, it does have a container itself, which might mean that we either want to put it one higher or one lower. So it's definitely an interesting problem to sort out and like see what makes the most sense. And again, it's something that doesn't appear on our app, right? So we've definitely put it in the right space on our app, but it's something that doesn't appear on our mobile device, but it's definitely something we'd want to handle on our actual like index, on our actual project that we're working on, especially if we want to include it in our portfolio. Cool. So we could try moving it within the div, see if that fixed it. I'm not going to spend too much time on this just because it is a smaller thing that needs to change, but refreshing now, that seems to have fixed it. So we'll leave it there for now and go for it. All right, awesome. Next step we want to take, well, actually, we're totally done with the homepage. So let's hop over to the next page and just sort of burn through that. We're about 30 minutes in, which is not that bad. So let's keep going. All right, cool. The next should be really quick to sort of set up. Well, what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and set up the next API I think we're going to need. So let's take a look at the data because basically every piece of data needs to correspond to an API. So what I can do here is, let's see, our next API is going to be, well, actually, our next page is stories, and I don't actually see an API for stories. So let's see what's going on here. looking at the components folder, it appears that there are two components. There's an already created hero with all of the data inside. So we don't actually need to pass in the data. And then I guess this is a good example of like what you could do if you didn't want to work with an API, right? You could literally just create all of these components and just hard code the data into it. I've worked on apps with both API type data and hard coded data, and like both are fine. I just find the API data a lot easier to work with. As you can see, it kind of does just clog up the entire component here. Like we're almost at 100 lines already just because of the amount of text that needs to go in here, which is fine. It's just a lot of information there. One thing that we could even do in a component like this to clean it up, if there are a lot of repeated elements, we could actually create something called style components, which I'll show you a little bit later in the lesson as we use them in different parts of the app. Anyhow, so let's hop over to our stories.tsx file, and which is actually our stories route here. So nothing there so far, but what we want to do is pass in, I think probably our hero, because usually the hero is the first thing you see on a page. So I'm going to transform this div into a box, and then I'm going to import that stories hero and save that. Let that refresh, and awesome. That seems to work well. Let me double check with the source, and yeah, that is what we want. So you'll see the mobile design is slightly different. It's like that layered, that image and the text below, but the desktop design, you can even check here, well, it's already there, is the text directly on top of the image. So it takes a little bit of background styling and working with CSS to get this to work properly. But again, just use the components and it'll make your life that much easier. Cool. So next we have our hero, but following the hero, we have our gallery. So this is where the gallery is really standing out. We have 12 different images here, more than that, 16 different images here. So we want to display all of these different images, basically our entire gallery on this page. So let's see what we have working here. We have a stories gallery container, which awesome. It actually uses our gallery API. So no new API needed for stories. Does the same, take the images and set the data to images. And then it just maps through all of our data here. So this is this component and the other gallery component, the other sort of component we created using the map of the gallery images is like two different ways to do the same thing, right? So we can work with our home gallery container or our stories gallery container, or we could work with a version that just combines both of them. Totally up to you what you're more comfortable with and what makes more sense. Awesome. So the next thing we're going to do is just drag this into our project. So I'm going to just bring stories gallery container and save that. And if I've done it correctly, awesome. They're all there. Perfect. Let me just refresh on, didn't even need to refresh, did it for me. Awesome, cool. So they're all there. So this particular container contains a really interesting component. So as you'll see, it maps over this component called gallery image. And I kind of glossed over it earlier, but what this gallery image component does is it sets a background image of a box, a set size box, and then from there it does responsive media queries based on the size of the device to sort of ensure that you have a consistent experience. And then on top of that image, it has a linear gradient. So it actually lays a linear gradient out on top of the actual box itself to give it that like dark sort of look. If I actually comment out this right here, if I comment that out, you'll notice all the images change. You can't really read the text and it's a little bit, things don't look quite right. So that's why we have that linear gradient in there, because it allows us to actually see the white text that's on top of the images, regardless of which image we're actually working with, whether it's a bright image or a dark image, etc. And then we also just display the actual image and the text that's related to it. So yeah, gallery image. It's one of those small components that you might not think about, but it definitely has a major impact in how the site looks and feels and works. Cool. So let's double check our source here. I think, yeah, that's the last component we need on that page. So we're done with 2 pages in another 5 minutes. So I can take a couple of questions here if folks have questions. Cool. Do you use a cloud to host your sites? So I actually use Vercel to host the site. So this website is actually hosted on Vercel. Vercel is a free platform, or it has free options, I should say. This is a freely hosted site that allows me to basically link it directly to my GitHub account and then only push or display those repositories that I do want to display. So this is one of those repositories I decided to display, and it created a free url.vercel.app for me to display. So yeah, definitely check out Vercel if you do want to use something like that. They have similar other options as well, but this is the one I choose to use. All right, cool. Let's hop and do the next 2 pages because I think we could probably knock this out in the next few minutes. So hopping over to features here, you'll see that we have this big sort of similar component to on our homepage, right? It's like text and image. So I'm guessing we're probably going to use that. And then we have our features, and then we have this new component, and then our footer. All right, so let's tackle it one at a time. So top here, it has features. So let's take a look. Let's close out stories. Let's close out app. Let's check out, oh, we need to create features. Let's start there. So new file, features.tsx, and let's create a features component. Awesome. Cool. So now we have the route, so it'll actually work. Let's hop back over here, hop into features. Cool. Nothing there, but at least we don't get an error, so we know it's working correctly. And then we need to display, oh yeah, we should check our APIs and our data. So there's one called feature page data. I think we're going to have to use that one for our hero. So the heading says features. We make sure all of our features are designed. And yeah, that's a heading. We make sure all our features are designed. So that's the one we want to use. So let's create our feature page API. So new file, I'm going to call it features. This is within the API folder. Feature page data.ts. And I'm just going to copy features, copy that, and paste. And it's going to have, I think probably just source heading and description. But I'm going to change this so it's from feature page data. And nope, missing something. Source, oh, CTA. Actually, we don't use the CTA, so I think we can get rid of that. Cool. Awesome. Feed source heading description, source heading description. Comma. Nope. What's missing there? That's weird. Giving us an error there. Feature page data.json, source, heading, description. Spelled everything right. That's also very important. Weird. Getting an error there. Huh. Oh. Telling, oh, you know what? It's because it's not an array. That's a silly mistake. All right, so I just need to take out the array here because it's not actually an array. Awesome. All right, silly mistake. So because it's literally just one object, it doesn't have the array property, of course. All right, cool. Let's hop back into it. So features, what I will probably want to do, well, first I want to fetch the data, right? So I want to do the exact same thing we're doing. Const data, set data, use state, and then just an object, not an object with an array. Source is going to be a string, empty string. Heading is going to be an empty string. And description is going to be an empty string as well. Cool. And we're going to import use state from React. Oh, cool. Did it. Awesome. Cool. And what here again? Use state. All right. Oh, you know what? It's giving us an error because this is a, oh, it's not an actual like React component. All right, so instead of fetching the data, we can literally just copy and paste this. So we can just say data equals this because it's literally like one object, and we can just use it normally. I think we probably just create another component as a workaround, but there are several different ways you can achieve the same result. So for now, we're just going to bring it in like this. All right, cool. So in the box here, what I want to do is, remember that that text and image container that we used? We're going to want to use that again in this component. So I'm going to close out some of these that we're not using. close that, close that. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to take the text and image container again, text and image container. Cool. And then I'm going to pass data, and I'm going to pass the object data to the property that it's looking for here, data, and save that. And it's giving me an error here. Oh, because CTA is missing. So I'm just going to add an empty CTA so we don't get that error. One thing you could also do is in the text and image container, you can make the CTA prop optional. So if you put a question mark there and I take away CTA here, we actually won't get an error on the CTA side, because it'll say, oh, it's an optional thing, like we don't need it. Then again, we would have to also like optionally not use it. So it's just sort of being careful about your types, but not focusing too much on TypeScript in this one, more so focusing on routing and APIs in Next.js. All right, cool. So we have our first component there. We have our features. They are showing up, our feature hero here, showing up and it's working well. Next one there, we want to just add our features in. And then this like beta, we're in beta message. So for the features, as remember, we kind of went into it in depth before. So we can really just import our features container. And if you remember, it checks whether or not the actual route starts with features. So in the other one, it only returned 3, but this one should return all 6. So if we've done it correctly, and we've named the route the right thing, if we scroll down, yeah, we should see all 6. Awesome, cool. Check it here, all 6, perfect. It's working well. Last thing we want to include now is this we're in beta. This is a new component we haven't worked with yet, but there should be some beta announcement. Perfect. That's what we're going to want to use. So it's just a really simple box with a background image, background set to no repeat. The background size is covered, so it takes up the whole space of the box. And yeah, just some basic info there. So I'm going to pass this in the bottom of the box here. Add that element right there. Save that. And awesome. Cool. So we're in beta and it's working right there. Awesome. And check it out on the features page. And yeah, there it is too. So we're basically done with like 75% of this app already. I think we can get the rest done in the next 5-10 minutes. Any questions before we keep going? No? Okay, cool. Awesome. If you do have any questions, I will be taking sort of more general questions at the end. I'll go through the entire chat and read through all the questions if folks have any general questions about coding. So please let me know. If you are interested in coding, there is a link in the description below to sign up for Davidson Programming Academy, where you can learn to code just starting at $14.9. It's actually cheaper than Codecademy. And you can start to code with a mentor as well, which is pretty awesome. So last page we're going to work on here is the pricing page. So the pricing page is going to be really a similar text component right here. And then we have 2 different components right here. We have this like toggleable plans, I guess, plan options. And then we have a compare table here. And then we have that beta message again. Okay, cool. So first things first, got to create the pricing page because it doesn't exist. So let's start there. So I'm going to go into the pages one more time. I'm going to create pricing.tsx, create the component, save that, and then head over to pricing, and we should see it there. Awesome, cool, it's working. Next thing we want to do is probably the same thing we did for features. So we're just going to grab that data, since it's literally one thing. It's a little bit more work than it's worth, and just save that to a variable called data. And save that. Change this to a box just to keep the style consistent. And then I'm going to grab that same text and image container and pass in that data. And save that. Awesome. Cool. So we have our first piece right there. Next thing was, what was it? We'll refresh that. Next thing was the like toggleable pricing component. So there must be something in the components, in maybe shared or pricing, maybe in pricing actually, called pricing container. That might be it. Yeah, pricing container. So pricing container does the same thing. Oh, we actually need to set up an API for this one. So we'll set up the API, then we'll import it. But it just creates these 3. Yeah, it maps through these cards. And then it creates 3 cards basically with the data that we passed it from the API. Awesome. So new file in API, pricing.ts. I think this is probably the last one we need to create. And if I go back to data, I'm going to grab this data from here. So it's an array, so it should be pretty straightforward. We're going to grab the info from, let's use features, and then I'm just going to drop it into pricing. And let me change that over to pricing and see what we got to change up there. All right, so let's see. Pricing has, what does it have for us? There it is. So it has a plan, a description, monthly price, and yearly price, and those are all strict. So we just need to change these up. So plan, we already have description. Let's move this to monthly price. And will you create this, whoops, one more time. And we'll call this yearly price. Save that. And cool, we should have all of that data. Awesome. So then I believe the only thing we need to do now is just put in this pricing container here. And it should just display all of this data for us perfectly. And there it is. So we have our basic, our pro, and our business plan. Awesome. And check it on our full, yeah, awesome. And when you click the toggle, they do change. Awesome, perfect. So the final thing, oh, you know what? Actually, it brought in our table as well. So that was really easy. We didn't actually have to do anything else there. Cool. So the table here, you know, just basically gives you information about which plans work with what. But I did code this by hand, so it actually does work on mobile device. Not as pretty, but it does give you the same information there. All right, last thing we need to do then is import one more component. We just need to import the beta component one more time, and then we should be good to go. All right, so let me go ahead and import beta announcement and save that. And then if we've done it right, yeah, there it is. It's right there. We're in beta, and checking it on the full stack page, it's there as well. So we've basically completed this whole project, minus sort of like little tweaks and interactions and external links, in like less than an hour. So it's definitely something that you want to, like, using other components, definitely something you want to consider if you want to build a project super quickly. You know, it's definitely worth it if you're trying to, especially if you wanted to sort of iterate and create several different projects with similar styling and format and feels to them. You could definitely build sort of more generic components and then use them with just different sets of data with different APIs. So yeah, we've talked about setting up your API with Next.js. We've talked about the routing with Next.js using the file folder system. We've talked about displaying data dynamically, right? When we checked for the route and to see if it started with a certain piece of text, you know, that was part of our dynamic sort of search, our dynamic display of different variables or different components, different elements. So definitely something really useful to use in whatever you're working with. And then we talked, and then, yeah, that was pretty much what we talked about. And then we also just made the website work and functional, and it's totally responsive as well, which is a nice feature to have. So are there any questions that I can answer at the moment? Let me hop through the chat real quick. How does React? Oh, so is this more back-end development? This is actually not back-end development. This is more pretty much all front-end development. I'm sure a back-end developer would look at this and be like, what are you doing? But this is like almost entirely front-end, but it does involve the back-end side of the API, working with APIs and things like that. So there is that element to it, but it's very front-end heavy. So there's a great video that I can link below about just like what backend and what backend and front end and full stack are considered to be. So depending if you're using backend as a service or you're using a really simple API, like what does your backend really look like? But no, this is probably, I'd say it's full stack, but it's more primarily front end. And then another question is, how does React differ from Angular? Angular is just another framework. Well, actually, sorry, let me back up. React is a library technically, so it needs other pieces to work. Angular is a full-blown framework, so you can just spin up an Angular app and it will work without external pieces. React, on the other hand, needs things like Next.js or Create React App or other frameworks in order to build properly. In terms of what they end up achieving, they're both pretty similar. From what I have experienced working with the two of them, Angular, it does have a lot more organization built in, but then React also, it's just a lot easier to get started. I often recommend to my students to learn React don't learn Angular, just because in terms of learning the concept of how to build these or how to work with these libraries or these frameworks, React I think is an easier way to get started. But both are valid to learn and work with, of course. With custom JSON and how we made them global. So the JSON that we worked with in our, so the question here was, how did we get the JSON to be like global and available to all parts of the app? So the JSON that we worked with in our project here, we put it at the highest level, the second highest level, like the almost the root level of our app, right? We put it in a folder called data. And then we use the API that is available to us because of Next.js. We use the API to basically create it. Remember when we made the country search last week? Link below if you haven't seen it. But using that to use a global API, or like a public API, I should say. We did the same thing, but we just fetched it from a local like resource, like it's literally in the folder next door. But when we host this website, it'll be at a specific route. So basically, we took the data from a JSON file and then we hosted it at a particular URL, and then using it as if it's just any old URL, we fetched it from there. So just like we fetched from the Pokemon API or the country search API, it's the same concept. It's the power that Next.js gives us to host it on that route. That's the power of, that's like basically what we can leverage and make it more of a full stack application here. But good question. What else? Oh, there's a question about courses. So yeah, as I mentioned, I do have a course here if you are interested in learning how to code. It's called Davidson Programming Academy. Basically, what it allows you to do is to learn how to be a front-end developer. So if you're interested in, learning all of these different technologies, HTML, CSS, you can start from the basics and go all the way to the end, and learn how to code full-time, and learn how to make like $150,000 a year or more, which is what the average American developer makes. Yeah, I do have some different membership offers available right now. I will cut off enrollment once we sort of hit a peak. So do make sure that if you're interested in taking this course, if you're serious about learning how to code, definitely sign up. I mean, the intro price is like less than like 0.01% of your annual predicted salary for a month. So definitely an investment, but I think based on like my experience, it's definitely worthwhile to invest in your education on this and get started sooner. I think also working with a mentor is sort of one of the sort of things we pride ourselves on in the program. 2 of the 3 options here allow you to work with a mentor. If you get our pro plan, you can meet with your mentor once a month, and if you get our unlimited plan, you can meet with the mentor as often as you want to. I think having a mentor side by side with you along the way as you're working on your project allows you to quickly unlock any problems you're having and quickly sort of step through any issues you're having. So again, I'm biased, but definitely think it's a worthwhile program. You can chat in the comments if you're one of my students and talk about your experience and whether or not you think it's worthwhile. Cool. Any other question? Oh, what are hooks? So hooks are basically custom functions that allow you to hook into something specific. So you can make your own hooks, or you can use hooks from that are provided to you from other libraries. But basically, what a hook does is it's just a custom function. The convention is to say use whatever, use effect, use state, etc. But yeah, it just allows you to access a piece of functionality essentially. Are data-driven apps common using React? Yeah, I mean, I've worked on projects with React and using data-driven projects using React. I've worked on data-driven projects using Angular. I think it just depends on which external libraries you're probably using alongside React and Angular and what's available to use with them and what makes sense. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's not popular. I think it's definitely popular. All right. Do you do any data-driven apps when you're doing think lost and global RDMS? Cool. Could you go into a little bit more detail when I'm using an RDMS to do CRUD operations? Could you explain that question a little bit more? I personally don't work on a lot of data driven apps, so maybe I can help sort of answer the heart of your question there. Oh, can I go with the pros and cons of creating custom APIs, like versus like hard coding? Oh, yeah, pros and cons of creating custom APIs. Yeah, pros of creating custom APIs. I mean, if say I'm working on this and okay, perfect example. Say I've created this project for PhotoSnap, right? And it's great. And I then get another client similar to PhotoSnap. Let's say it's like, you know, photo photoshopped. I don't know. But you get a similar client who wants a very similar website. Rather than if I've hard coded the data, I now have to go into every single component and change every single piece of data, which is fine. If they want almost an identical website or website with a few tweaks, it's fine, right? However, I could also literally just go into my data folder or my API, wherever my endpoint lives, and change the data here. And that is way faster. That's like 1,000 times for me at least. It's way faster. I don't need to find all these different places where all this stuff lives. I can literally just go here, say, all right, Photoshop, change, the description, change this, change that, put in all of their data. And it's going to be so much faster if I do it here than if I do it in each individual file. I literally only need to access a couple of files in this folder rather than the entire file structure. So that's why I'd say using an API is advantageous to hard coding data. I think speed and scalability. Cool. Any other questions? Any other questions on TikTok? All right, cool. Well, if there are any other questions, please feel free to actually comment down below. I do respond to all the comments, all questions, or as I said, reach out to me on my website. You can reach out to me. You can schedule a free call if you want to just like chat about whether or not you think the program is a good fit for you, all of those things. Or if you literally just have any coding questions and you want to ask me about them, feel free to book a quick call, 15-minute call, no strings attached. I'll just give you coding advice if you want, review a resume, do a little mock interview, whatever you need. Yeah, I'm here to sort of provide education as much as I can. We just have the memberships to make it sort of an affordable and sustaining thing. So yeah, if you do have any questions, please feel free to comment down below. Send me an email, book a free call, send me a message. And yeah, if anything, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.